Happy Tuesday, November 29th, 2023. I've got 100 subscribers, so I thought I would celebrate since I suppose that'll be my peak. We'll see. Um, but thank you all for subscribing, and those of you who also comment and like and watch at least a minute of these, which isn't a bad, not a bad playing time. Thank you all. I have recently been putting up some Pauline Kael, and she's gotten some dislike, um, especially for her Blade Runner. So I thought for the celebration I would record some more of her opinions about science fiction. And I find she doesn't review too much of it, which probably indicates she doesn't like it. So hopefully this will be fun. This is Star Wars from the New Yorker. Let's see, September 18, 1977. And it'll be just two paragraphs here. The loudness, the smash and grab editing, the relentless pacing drive every idea from your head. For young audiences, Star For young audiences, Star Wars is like getting a box of Cracker Jack, which is all prizes. This is the writer-director George Lucas's own film, subject to no business interference. Yet it's a film that's totally uninterested in anything that doesn't connect with the mass audience. There's no breather in the picture, no lyricism. The only attempt at beauty is in the double sunset. It's enjoyable on its own terms, but it's exhausting too, like taking a pack of kids to the circus. An hour into it, children say that they're ready to see it all over again. That's because it's an assemblage of spare parts. It has no emotional grip. Star Wars may be the only movie in which the first time around the surprises are reassuring. Going a second time would be like trying to read Catch-22 twice. Even if you've been entertained, you may feel cheated of some dimension, a sense of wonder perhaps. It's an epic without a dream, but it's probably the absence of wonder that accounts for the film's special huge success. The excitement of those who call it the film of the year goes way past nostalgia to the feeling that now is the time to return to childhood. Maybe the only real inspiration involved in Star Wars was to set its sci-fi galaxy in the pop culture past, and to turn old movie ineptness into conscious pop art. And maybe there's a touch of genius in keeping it so consistently what it is, even if this is the genius of the plotting. Lucas has got the tone of bad movies down pat. You never catch the actors deliberately acting badly. They just seem to be bad actors, on contract to Monogram or Republic, their clunky enthusiasm polished at the Ricky Nelson School of Acting. In a gesture toward equality of the sexes, the high school cheerleader Princess in Distress talks tomboy tough, Terry Moore with spunk. It is because the picture is synthesized from the mythology of serials and old comic books that it didn't occur to anybody that she could get the Force. That's her review of Star Wars. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is the most innocent of all technological Marvel movies, and one of the most satisfying. This film has retained some of the wonder and bafflement we feel when we first go into a planetarium. We ooh and ah at the vastness, and at the beauty of the mystery. The film doesn't overawe us, though, because it has a child's playfulness and love of surprises. There is a moment that is startlingly funny in its obviousness, when a whole landscape of people in India who are ecstatically chanting a five-note theme, are asked where these sounds came from, and a mass of arms are raised straight up, forefingers pointing. In routine science fiction films, any bodies from space are alien invaders. They come from out there, and we start running or shooting. But in close encounters, they come from up there. They're sunburst gods arriving through Blakean Old Testament clouds. This isn't nuts and bolts popular mechanics sci-fi. It's beatific technology, machines from outer space deified. And to cap it all, the intelligent creatures in these machines are benevolent. They want to get to know us. This vision would be too warm and soul-satisfying if it weren't for the writer-director Steven Spielberg's skeptical, let's-try-it-on spirit. He's an entertainer, a magician in the age of movies. Is Spielberg an artist? Not exactly, or not yet. He's a prodigy, a flim-flam wizard technician. The immense charm of Close Encounters comes from the fact that, for all its scale and expense, $19 million. This is a young man's movie. Spielberg is still under 30, and there's not a sour thought in it. The title is from a book by the astronomer Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Close encounters of the first kind are sightings, the second kind are physical evidence, and the third involve actual contact. Sightings aren't necessarily close, and they're not encounters, and physical evidence isn't an encounter either, but the title sounds good anyway. The basic story is scanty. This unidentified flying objects movie is about those who are looking for answers. In Muncie, Indiana, an electrical power company lineman named Roy, played by Richard Dreyfuss, a 3-year-old boy named Barry, played by Cary Guffey, the boy's mother, played by Melinda Dillon, and a collection of innocuous misfits, retired folks, and artists all catch sight of the flaring lights of spacecraft. Some of them are sunburned, and a vision is implanted in them. They become obsessed with a shape they don't understand, a bumpy, sawed-off pyramid or mountain. At the same time, an international team of scientists, headed by a clear-headed Frenchman, Lacombe, played by Francois Truffaut, is dashing about the globe picking up word of other signals, which direct the team to a mountain in Wyoming. It is the spot the aliens have chosen for a rendezvous with us Earthlings, and the dreamers, the invited guests, converge upon it. But military personnel who are working with the scientific team cut most of them off. It's a going to Bethlehem story. Only those with enough faith and luck make it. Close Encounters is a vindication of village crazies. Those people always give you the feeling they know something you don't, and in this scientific fairy tale, it turns out they do. God is up there in a crystal chandelier spaceship, and he likes us. The stoned, the gullible, the half-mad, and just plain folks are his chosen people. To be more exact, it likes us. The extraterrestrials appear to have evolved beyond sex. The largest craft, the mothership, is a great celestial body, a symmetrical, rounded Christmas tree ornament as big as a city. When it descends from on high, looming over the mountain and hovering there, no storybook illustration can compete with it. This is something only movies can do, dazzle you by sheer scale, and in this case by lights and music as well. Spielberg is the son of an electrical engineer, sci-fi addict father, and a classical pianist mother, and in the climax of the film he does justice to both. Under the French scientist's direction, the Earthlings are ready with a console, and they greet the great craft with an oboe solo, variations on the five-note theme. The craft answers in deep tuba tones. The dialogue becomes blissfully garrulous, and with light flooding out from the windows of this omniscient spaceship, it's like New York's skyscrapers all lighted up on a summer night. There is a conversational duet, the music of the spheres. This is one of the peerless moments in movie history, spiritually reassuring, magical, and funny at the same time. Very few movies have ever hit upon this combination of fantasy and amusement. The Wizard of Oz, perhaps, in a plainer, down-home way. Close Encounters 2 is a kids' movie in the best sense. You can feel the pleasure the young director took in making it. With his gift for inventing machines with personality, Spielberg is the right director for science fantasy. He made a malevolent character of a truck in Duel, his famous made-for-TV movie. In his first theatrical feature, The Sugarland Express, he had cars dancing, feuding, bonding. In his second film, Jaws, he turned a computer-operated shark into a personal enemy. And now he's got his biggest mechanical toys, the mothership and the flying saucer Herald Angels, whirring through the skies, flashing their lights. Some are intergalactic pucks, teasing Earthlings and leading them on fool's chases. Some are stately geometric forms, spinning languorously. Each is like a musical divertimento, a delight unto itself. Jaws was a nightmare movie. This is a dream. In Jaws, the harrowing terror kept building. Here the mystical good humor builds. The story envelops you. With Truffaut as Lacombe, the sympathies of the scientist don't have to be explained. He is essentially the educated man of goodwill that Truffaut played in his own The Wild Child. Truffaut suggests efficiency plus innate refinement. His forehead is noble, his features are modeled in a seraphic smile, and he's small. His Lacombe is a calm, wise child who responds to the vision of the dreamer misfits, shares their instinctive trust of what is in space. And when, at last, he communicates with a visitor from above, there is a fleeting suggestion of Jean Renoir's lopsided grin in the extraterrestrial's young old face. There are, of course, limitations to science fiction movies. People used to love to be frightened by ghost stories, those evil portents of a world beyond death, with their intimations of haunted, macabre sex. Those stories belonged to an age when people lived in fear of their own impulses, and in dread of punishment. And movies were able to bring out the story's primitive, sophisticated power, their suggestiveness. Science fiction, the modern successor to tales of the supernatural, lacks those psychological dimensions. It doesn't have the whole nighttime apparatus of guilt and superstition clinging to it. The attraction of science fiction is that it's an escape into an almost abstract unknown. Those who are frightened of, despairing about, or bored with this world like to turn their hopes to other worlds in space, but they're not much interested in people. Imagination and idealism are expressed in simplified, allegorical terms. Generally speaking, when a speculative fantasy deals with human conflicts in any depth, it ceases to be called science fiction. The persistent fault of sci-fi movies has been the split between the splendor of their special effects and the stilted mediocrity of their characters, situations, and dialogue. There has probably never been a first-rate characterization in an American science fiction movie. How could there be, since the stories don't depend on character? That's why science fiction used to be considered a pulp genre. It's difficult to think of even one well-written role. Kubrick's 2001 was no exception. Its only character who made any impression was Hal, the voice of the computer. In Star Wars, audiences fell in love with R2-D2 and C-3PO. People had the same reaction to Robbie, the robot in Forbidden Planet, and to the drones in Silent Running, which was directed by Douglas Trumbull, who supervised the special photographic effects in Close Encounters. In sci-fi movies, the robots have personalities. The actors usually don't. 2001 wasn't a pop escapist fantasy like Star Wars. It was an attempt at a more serious view of the future, which was seen as an extension of now, a superordinary world. In Kubrick's conception, there was no richness, no texture. It was all blandness. He might as well have been saying, "I have seen the future, and it put me to sleep." Spielberg's movie is set right now, and it has none of that ponderous seriousness. But it's the same bland now that sci-fi enthusiasts seem to think we live in. The banality is really in their view of human life. With a vast clear sky full of stars and a sense of imminence, much of the movie feels like being inside the dome of an enchanted cathedral waiting for the arrival. Terse, swift, heightened dialogue is called for. Instead, we hear casual, ordinary man language, and although it has an original, colloquial snap, Spielberg just doesn't have the feeling for words which he has for images. And he doesn't create the central characters, Barry's mother and Roy, or develop them. In a writer's way, he's thinking about how to get them into the positions he wants them in for his visual plan. Roy is supposed to be the Hitchcockian ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances. For Hitchcock, that could be Cary Grant, but for Spielberg it means a sincere attempt to show how a lumpy average man living in pop culture emptiness could get caught up in a quest. Richard Dreyfuss's Roy waddles in rear view and becomes moist-eyed when he longs for knowledge. We seem to be asked to respond to Roy for being out of condition and at times out of control. There's a fine dinner scene in which Roy's children who love him are upset by the compulsiveness of his behavior. They can feel him growing away from them. But Spielberg doesn't follow through on the change in Roy. He jumps to a low-comedy marriage breakup scene. And after we've had a few close-ups of Roy's hectic fervor, as he attempts to share his UFO experience with his pragmatic wife, played by Terry Garr, her dry Philistinism has a hard-edged comic strip appeal. With her one-track mind, she's a frozen pizza in Roy's yearning mystic eye. As one of the crackpots, a man who has seen Bigfoot as well as flying saucers, Roberts Blossom has the look of a true believer. That's what Dreyfuss lacks. Spielberg is far more successful with Barry, the 3-year-old, whose pure lust for otherworldly entertainment is delicately funny. Barry, the toddling light worshipper, who sees the sky as a giant toy shop, is closer to the heart of Spielberg's vision than Roy, whose looking for answers Dreyfuss strains to represent. Steven Spielberg is probably the most gifted American director who's dedicated to sheer entertainment. He may have different aims from the aims of people we call artists, but he has integrity. It centers on his means. His expressive drive is to tell a story in shots that are live and hopping, and his grasp of graphic dynamics may be as strong as that of anyone working in movies now. The spatial relationships inside the frame here owe little to the stage, or even to painting. Spielberg succeeds in making the compositions so startlingly immediate that they give off an electric charge. He puts us right in the middle of the action, yet there's enough aesthetic distance. He doesn't assault us. Though the perspectives don't appear forced or unnatural, they're often slightly tilted, with people moving rapidly in or out of the frame, rarely intersecting the center and never occupying it. By designing the images in advance, Spielberg is able to cut without any confusion. Nobody cuts faster on shots full of activity than he does, yet it's never just for the sake of variety. It's what the movie is about that generates the images and the cutting pattern. And there's a consistent pick-up in excitement from shot to shot, a ziggety forward motion. Even the weakly motivated sequences, which are needed for a later visual payoff, such as Roy's going batty and tearing up his garden and throwing mud and plants through his kitchen window, or the mountain scaling out of North by Northwest, which comes across as a delaying tactic, are partly saved by Spielberg's visual energy. Close Encounters is big and complex. In addition to Vilmos Zsigmond, who was the director of photography, other famous cinematographers, William A. Fraker, Douglas Slocum, John Alonzo, and Laszlo Kovacs, worked on it. And there are sequences, such as the one in India, that are fine in themselves, yet don't have Spielberg's distinctive graphics. But he never loses the emotional drive of his subject, and he gives audiences full opportunity to luxuriate in the sensuousness of the spectacle. It's too bad that John Williams, who did the score, thinks he's still working on Jaws. Movie music in general has reached the point where if it isn't meant to cheer you or to scare you, the composer doesn't know what to do. Except for the great duet here, Williams provides emotional noise, rising and shrilling in the Bernard Herrmann manner. The score fails to match the witty use of rapturousness in such images as that of Barry trotting out of his house at night, just a speck on the prairie under a blanket of stars and a huge rolling cloud. Close Encounters shows an excess of kindness, an inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to perceive the streak of cowardice and ignorance and confusion in the actions of the authorities who balk the efforts of the visionaries to reach their goal. Having devised a plot in which the government systematically covers up information about UFO sightings, Spielberg is much too casual about how this is done and imprecise about why. He has a paranoid plot, yet he hasn't dramatized the enemy. The obstacles here are just Air Force and Army men doing their duty, and these authorities are shrugged off by the cranks, or humbly accepted. Roy and the others don't have the incapacitating hatred of smooth-talking authority which would make us respond to their frustration, would make us feel what was unhinging them. Impersonality doesn't enrage Spielberg because he hasn't got at the personality hidden in it. Stock villainy isn't what's needed. Something deeper is. He had similar trouble with the corrupt local merchants and politicians in Jaws. Their corruption was tired, ritualized. It was necessary for the plot, that was all. In Close Encounters, there is nothing behind what the military men do except bureaucratic indifference. But that means they don't know what they're doing, and to be so totally blind is tragic, crazy emptiness. Spielberg has a genuine affection for harmless aberrants, but he doesn't fathom the dangerous aberrance of authority, particularly an authority that in its own eyes is being completely reasonable. In terms of his plot, Spielberg needs some Terry Southern in his soul, or maybe even some Norman Wexler. He needs to show us how scared bureaucrats are of something they can't understand and don't know how to handle. Steven Spielberg is commercial without really being commercial. That is, he's a popular entertainer who doesn't have a feeling for the profane, sneaky pleasures of tawdriness. Close Encounters is so generous in its feelings that it makes one feel maternal and protective. There's also another side of one which says, I could use a little dirty friction. Most directors who make sweet movies are unskilled, and you're supposed to forgive them their incompetence because of their niceness. Spielberg may be the only director, with technical virtuosity ever, to make a transcendently sweet movie. Close Encounters is almost the opposite of Star Wars, in which a whole planet was blown up and nobody batted an eye. It seems almost inconceivable, but nobody gets hurt in this movie, except the occupants of one police car, who are so delirious in their pursuit of a flying object that they hurtle off the highway into the air and then bounce down to earth in a ditch, and they may be too surprised to be hurt. The film is like Oklahoma in space, with jokes. It's spiritual cotton candy, and it goes down easy. The summer sky's atmosphere is achieved by certain exclusions. The film is virtually sexless, and the aliens don't deliver any invitations to the Soviet bloc, so there's no political scrambling in the race to the rendezvous. Mercifully, there's no cosmological philosophizing either. Nobody stands around arguing about what the manifestations prove. As was the case with 2001, though, the publicity is full of the usual announcements about the data in it not having been disproved. And statistics about how many millions of people claim to have seen flying saucers are used to give the film an almost official status, as if it were a daring inquiry into facts that the government is hiding from us. These publicity claims of credibility and usefulness only take away from what should be the film's enduring appeal as fantasy. Close Encounters is a beautiful, big, enjoyable film that sends you out happy. It might be even better if there weren't so many people at the end looking upward with transfigured faces. Star Wars had its guru, Alec Guinness, in his Neo-Lost Horizon trappings, and this film, too, has its gaseous naivete, but it has the visionary magic to go with it. If Roy and Lacombe and the other dreamers do a lot of blinking and staring up with wet eyes, it's not like The Miracle of Our Lady of Fatima. Here we at least get to see what they're staring at, and we watch Roy ascend the stairway to heaven. Spielberg is busy, like that fine humbug Wizard of Oz, pressing buttons on his light panel. He puts on a great show. That's a review of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Pauline Kael did not really review 2001, but she does talk about it in her essay, Trash, Art, and the Movies. I think there's two parts in here where she mentions it. This is from section 4. The new tribalism in the age of the media is not necessarily the enemy of commercialism. It is a direct outgrowth of commercialism and its ally, perhaps even its instrument. If a movie has enough clout, reviewers and columnists who were bored are likely to give it another chance, until, on the second or third viewing, they discover that it affects them viscerally, and a big, expensive movie is likely to do just that. 2001 is said to have caught on with youth, which can make it happen, and it's said that the movie will stone you, which is meant to be a recommendation. Despite a few dissident voices, I have heard it said, for example, that 2001 gives you a bad trip because the visuals don't go with the music. The promotion has been remarkably effective with students. The tribes tune in so fast that college students thousands of miles apart have heard what a great trip 2001 is before it has even reached their city. And section 8 of the essay is about 2001. Here is the whole section. 2001 is a movie that might have been made by the hero of Blow Up, and it's fun to think about Kubrick really doing every dumb thing he wanted to do, building enormous science fiction sets and equipment, never even bothering to figure out what he was going to do with them. Fellini, too, had gotten carried away with the erector set approach to movie making, but his big science fiction construction, exposed to view at the end of 8 1/2, was abandoned. Kubrick never really made his movie either, but he doesn't seem to know it. Some people like the American International Pictures stuff because it's rather idiotic, and maybe some people love 2001 just because Kubrick did all that stupid stuff, acted out a kind of super sci-fi nuts fantasy. In some ways, it's the biggest amateur movie of them all, complete even to the amateur movie obligatory scene, the director's little daughter in curls, telling Daddy what kind of present she wants. There was a little pre-title sequence in You Only Live Twice, with an astronaut out in space that was in a looser, more free style than 2001. A daring little moment that I think was more fun than all of 2001. It had an element of the unexpected, of the shock of finding death in space lyrical. Kubrick is carried away by the idea. The secondary title of Dr. Strangelove, which we took to be satiric, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, was not, it now appears, altogether satiric for Kubrick. 2001 celebrates the invention of tools of death as an evolutionary route to a higher order of non-human life. Kubrick literally learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. He's become his own butt, the Herman Kahn of extraterrestrial games theory. The ponderous, blurry appeal of the picture may be that it takes its stoned audience out of this world to a consoling vision of a graceful world of space, controlled by superior godlike minds, where the hero is reborn as an angelic baby. It has the dreamy, somewhere over the rainbow appeal of a new vision of heaven. 2001 is a celebration of cop-out. It says man is just a tiny nothing on the stairway to paradise. Something better is coming, and it's all out of your hands anyway. There's an intelligence out there in space, controlling your destiny from ape to angel. So just follow the slab. Drop up. It's a bad, bad sign when a movie director begins to think of himself as a myth maker. And this limp myth of a grand plan that justifies slaughter and ends with resurrection has been around before. Kubrick's storyline, accounting for evolution by an extraterrestrial intelligence, is probably the most gloriously redundant plot of all time. And although his intentions may have been different, 2001 celebrates the end of man. Those beautiful mushroom clouds at the end of Strangelove were no accident. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, death and life are all the same. No point is made, in the movie, of Gary Lockwood's death. The moment isn't even defined, and the hero doesn't discover that the hibernating scientists have become corpses. That's unimportant in a movie about the beauties of resurrection. Trip off to join the cosmic intelligence and come back a better mind. And as the trip in the movie is the usual psychedelic light show, the audience doesn't even have to worry about getting to Jupiter. They can go to heaven in Cinerama. It isn't accidental that we don't care if the characters live or die. If Kubrick has made his people so uninteresting, it is partly because characters and individual fates just aren't big enough for certain kinds of big movie directors. Big movie directors become generals in the arts, and they want subjects to match their new importance. Kubrick has announced that his next project is Napoleon, which for a movie director is the equivalent of Joan of Arc for an actress. Lester's savage comments about affluence and malaise, Kubrick's inspirational banality about how we will become as gods through machinery, are big-shot show business deep thinking. This isn't a new show business phenomenon. It belongs to the genius tradition of the theater. Big entrepreneurs, producers, and directors who stage big, spectacular shows, even designers of large sets, have traditionally begun to play the role of visionaries and thinkers and men with answers. They get too big for art. Is a work of art possible if pseudoscience and the technology of movie making become more important to the artist than man? This is central to the failure of 2001. It's a monumentally unimaginative movie. Kubrick, with his $750,000 centrifuge, and in love with gigantic hardware and control panels, is the Belasco of science fiction. The special effects, though straight from the drawing board, are good and big and awesomely expensively detailed. There's a little more that's good in the movie, when Kubrick doesn't take himself too seriously, like the comic moment when the gliding space vehicles begin their Johann Strauss waltz. That is to say, when the director shows us a bit of sense of proportion about what he's doing, and sees things momentarily as comic, when the movie doesn't take itself with such idiot solemnity. The light show trip is of no great distinction compared to the work of experimental filmmakers like Jordan Belson. It's third rate. If big film directors are to get credit for doing badly what others have been doing brilliantly for years with no money, just because they've put it on a big screen, then businessmen are greater poets, and theft is art. Let's finish up with Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. The director, Nicholas Meyer, has made the dialogue scenes jazzy without violating the characters, and using the contrast between Ricardo Montalban's fiery Khan and William Shatner's pasty Captain Kirk as the psychological center, he keeps the movie whipping from one incident to another. Montalban, who was born in Mexico in 1920, is one of those potentially major actors who never got the roles that might have made them movie stars. He appeared to have everything else: a marvelous camera face, the physique of a trained dancer, talent, a fine voice, he could even sing, warmth and great charm. Maybe the charm was a drawback. It may have made him seem too likable, a lightweight, though it didn't stop Charles Boyer. In Montalban's first English-language picture, MGM's Fiesta, in 1947, which featured Esther Williams as a matador, he danced with Sid Charisse. MGM next had him dancing with Charisse and Ann Miller in a Kathryn Grayson-Frank Sinatra film called The Kissing Bandit. It was said that the dancing was added after the executives saw the movie. They wanted to give the customers something. He kept working in pictures such as On an Island with You, with Charisse and Esther Williams, and Neptune's Daughter, and Sombrero, starring Vittorio Gassman, and the low-budget My Man and I, in which he played a very sexy handyman and displayed his pectorals, and Latin Lovers, in which he carted Lana Turner around in a tango. He had secondary parts in Sayonara and Hemingway's Adventure of a Young Man, and in Cheyenne Autumn, and he brought conviction to every role that anyone could bring conviction to. But after almost 20 years in Hollywood, there he was in 1966 in The Singing Nun with Debbie Reynolds, and with Lana again in Madam X. He seems to have lived a lucrative horror story, especially when you think of the TV commercials and his ever-ready smile on Fantasy Island. It may be that Khan, in the 1967 TV episode Space Seed, was the best big role he had ever got, and that the continuation of the role in The Wrath of Khan is the only validation he has ever had of his power to command the big screen. Montalban is unquestionably a star in The Wrath of Khan, and his grand manner seems to send a little electric charge through Shatner. As a graying Superman who, when foiled, cries out to Kirk, "From hell's heart I stab at thee," Montalban may be the most romantic smoothie of all sci-fi villains. Khan's penchant for quoting Melville and Milton, which goes back to Space Seed, doesn't hurt. And that great chest of Montalban's is reassuring. He looks like an Inca priest, and he's still champing at the bit, eager to act. He plays his villainy to the hilt, smiling grimly as he does the dirty. He and his blonde barbarian followers are dressed like pirates or a 60s motorcycle gang. Montalban's performance doesn't show a trace of Fantasy Island. It's all panache. If he isn't wearing feathers in his hair, you see them there anyway. You know how you always want to laugh at the flourishes that punctuate the end of a flamenco dance, and the dancers don't let you? Montalban does. His bravado is grandly comic. Khan feels he was born a prince, and in all the years that he was denied his due because of Kirk in his thinking, his feelings of rage have grown enormous. They're manias now. Nothing can stop him from giving in to them. His words and gestures are one long sigh of relief. He's letting out his hatred. This man, who believes that his search for vengeance is like Ahab's, makes poor pompous Kirk even more self-conscious. Kirk is Khan's white whale, and he knows he can't live up to it. He's not worthy of Khan's wrath. I will stop there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing if you have. And like and comment on any of these if you wish to. I hope you will. And I hope you enjoy some of this stuff I read. But let me know what you think if you like. And happy 100 to me, I guess.